Hello, everyone. My name is Abdurrahman Gilal. And what if I ask you the question why cybersecurity is important? I know most of you will be saying because it helps our, data to be protected. It helps our devices to be protected from unauthorized access, and so many answers can be coming. So, how basically these things happen? Now, have you ever thought about that? So, I have categorized the steps by which one would understand them easily. So, my understanding is like the first and foremost important thing is that it comes from the law and government bodies. So, the first thing first is the formal binding or instruments that you have to make sure that your government is thinking of them. Your sometimes your constitution is thinking to protect your data or your rights over internet. So the thing comes from laws, and then these laws are interpreted from the regulations. So we know that GDPR, HIPAA, HIPAA, there's a lot of other regulations out there, different countries, different regulations because they have different laws, right? In order to implement those regulations, the organization then have their own policies, procedures, and guidelines. So, and then in order to implement those policies and procedure, most of the time, organizations follow technical or consensus-based instruments. For example, there are standards available, there are framework available, there are protocols available. You've been needing them all this while. And then there are other platforms such as community-based platforms or expert-based platform or industry-led instruments or platforms where volunteer work has been produced most of the time, where expert has analyzed or researched a lot of things, and then they produce to some standards which you can follow or use them without paying any cost, right? And if you are implementing, let's say, some protocols or standards or trying to implement those policies or procedures, how you ensure that these things are, basically implemented properly. So you have assessment instruments or you have assurance instruments available. That's why, like, I have given you this this table, which is where you start from the formal binding, where you have basically law should be on the top and then regulation should be at the bottom, because we know that from the constitution we drive the law. So the law or act are basically after the constitution. So it is basically prepared by the legislation, so or government bodies, which are basically making it obligated for all the subsidiaries of the government or any organization that's within the government in order to protect our intellectual or any rights over internet or on the computer systems. So we know that in order to make sure that how these things will happen, so we have regulations. So these regulations are basically prepared by the government so that organization would be following them, right? So GDPR is one of the example. HIPAA is one of the another examples. So you may have so many other regulations available based on the place where you live and you work, and then your organization set up those policies and procedures and guidelines to make sure that they are implementing their regulations set by the government. So the policies are basically higher level, things to do. So they're say to guide you the behavioral decisions set by the organization. So these are mandatory, definitely mandatory, because you set up these all things so that you make sure that your organization is basically following all those things. How one should be implementing the policies? So you have procedures and guidelines. So the procedures are always mandatory, but internal, and the guidelines are sometimes just recommendations which you can follow in order to make sure that you are following the better practices or best practices, right? And then in order to implement those all guidelines and procedures, most of the time we use standards, which are basically official consensus-based document defining, a lot of norms and requirements. That we have IEEE, we have ACM, we have NIST. We have so many standards available. They give us so many requirements in order to implement certain requirements by the government or set by your organization, right? And sometimes, like, we have framework by which you can set up your organization in a way so that you can make sure that these standards or these procedures are working through finally, such as, for example, we have NIST CFF, CECSF, which means Cybersecurity Framework. So 2.0 is there, 1.0 is old. So we have those frameworks available. And sometimes in order to implement the technical things that your device is going to communicate with other device, so you need to follow some protocols, such as you're following HTTPS protocol over internet, or you have many other like file transfer protocols and so many protocols in order to make sure that your device or software or application has interoperability things done. So yeah, it's all of them are mandatory to implement it, right? So, but the frameworks are not implement mandatory; they are voluntary. If you use, it's going to basically help your processes to go through finally, right? And as I told you, that it's not necessary that you should have always follow the standard of protocols which are paid. You can also take the community-based practices. So one of the examples is OWSP. So that standards basically give you the expert opinion. You know that in the standards we have experts, but these organizations are big organizations. So the practices and tool actually developed by the industry or community of researchers or community of developers, they can still be used by us so that we can make sure that we are implementing all those policies or regulations. And last, once we implement something, so there are a lot of other instruments such as certification schemes. Like we have this ISO 27000, 9000, and so many other instruments available, which are basically used to ensure that if we have really practiced the standards in the right way. So these are different instruments available, and I have categorized them based on my understanding. And I think that's all about today's presentation. If you got any questions, please do not hesitate to approach me. Thank you so much, guys.